Thank you, my brother, and thanks to all of you, especially to the leadership of the congregation for the invitation to be with you this day. And I hope and pray that what we do, I present a lot of this material in an academic setting. And I'm going to try not to be too academic, but I'm still going to be forced, if I deal with it honestly, to introduce some terms that you might not be quite familiar with. Don't be intimidated by that. I've found that if you get some loggers together, they use terminology that if you don't understand logging, you may not be familiar with. Grew up around shrimpers, they have their own language and nomenclature. And so it's that way in the study of Christian apologetics as well. And so, well, I'll do my best to keep that to a minimum. I regret that I won't be able to participate in the question and answer session. I've got a funeral. One of our members, longtime members, passed away. And I've got to get my remarks prepared for that this afternoon. And so I'm running against a hard deadline. With that said, I'm going to stay pretty close to the material that I prepared to keep me from doing what I like to do, and that is offer observations that occur once I get in the flow. Begin with me in Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Moses is being commissioned of God. And then Moses said to God, "Behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, what's his name?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am sent me to you." The most fundamental question that a human being can contemplate is the existence of God. And you come to face the question, is man to view himself as supreme or acknowledge a being superior to himself? You think about all the strong men around the world that are vying for the position of supreme leader. Which one would you want to trust? And we must face the question, am I going to be my own God? Am I supreme? Or is there somebody above me and better than me that will help me? Is man to live for the flesh? Or should spiritual matters be the primary emphasis of his life? Asserting, you know that God exists, I just know he does, is not adequate when you're dealing with a skeptical person who is a thoughtful person. You cannot just say that or assert that and not produce some evidence and gain acceptance. Brother Thomas B. Warren had a lot of influence on me in my younger years, and he was of the opinion, and I think he was right. He predicted this slide into secularism. And he made it his life mission to try to prepare a cadre of young men who could meet those people on their own terms and speak to them in a way that would prevail. And so here we come to a time when we find a lot of people in key positions who are very skeptical, and they're going to need some evidence put before them. It is not reasonable to think that God would create himself and not at the same time provide some information that gives evidence of his existence. And since it is logical to conclude that God would provide evidence of his existence, I assume it's my job and your job to investigate the evidence that's at hand. Since he wouldn't expect us to believe in the absence of evidence, then we assume it's our job to investigate that evidence. And so that's what I propose to do this afternoon. You can know that God exists in the same way that you know any other non-experienced truth. What in the world do you mean by that? Well, for example, it is a true statement when I say, I know that Africa exists, but I've not ever been to Africa. I went to school with a bunch of people who were from Africa, but I've not been there. I've not seen that great continent and the animals that roam free, and I've not been to Chimala Mission Hospital and the schools that we have a part in that are there. But it's a matter of deduction based on evidence. We cannot know God's existence by the use of the scientific method, and I'm not here to denigrate the scientific method, but the scientific method is limited to the here and now, to the physical, to that which can be apprehended through the physical senses. God is not the result of an experiment in somebody's laboratory, and the scientific method deals with empirical evidence and research and is limited to that, and that's a big limitation because there is a thing known as metaphysics, which is beyond our ideas and concepts about physics. The scientific method is a way to know, but it's not the only way to know. We cannot smell, taste, touch, hear, or see God in his person. We can only smell, touch, taste, hear, and see manifestations of his existence. And we deduce from what is, God is. And I think we're on solid ground with that. We also work with testimony, not only what we see around us, but we work with testimony of those who did hear and see God when he manifested himself in a physical form, when he met with Moses and others that were keepers of the covenant, Abraham, Isaac. In a similar way, we know that Robert the Bruce, and there's a Bruce here, unified Scotland into one nation. That was no small task. Well, how do we know that? Well, we examine the testimony of people that were there, that had some input into that, and draw those conclusions that the testimony provides evidence for. In the same way, we can know that God exists by examining testimony of those who saw him, who heard him. Remember, always, brethren, it is not the believer's assignment, not our obligation to prove that God is. It is the duty of the skeptic to prove that he is not. That's where the burden is, on his shoulders. The burden of proof is the atheist, and we'll let him carry that. Let's begin. I want to try to introduce three classical arguments for the existence of God. And here you're going to get an academic word. Don't be frightened. It's just a word. But it is the ontological argument. And you're sitting there thinking, what? It is the argument from the idea of God. The idea of God exists. It exists across the world. And when you begin to consider that in a serious way, that's called ontology. Of all the arguments for the existence of God, this one may be the trickiest one to get a hold of. And yet, the atheist cannot logically, he cannot rationally refute it or reject it. From the concept of God as the supreme being, from everlasting to everlasting, his existence cannot be rationally doubted. God's existence is necessarily involved in the idea of God. How so? Well, how did the word, for example, how did the word God find its way into the human vocabulary? How would that be? How human knowledge can come from one of three directions: observation, experience, or divine revelation. That's how we acquire knowledge. Man would never. Now you just think about mankind, the state of mankind today as you see it all around you. Mankind would never have developed the concept of God if God did not exist and never revealed himself to man. And the notion that man just dreamed God up is, to be being as polite as I know how, is an absurd notion. Man would not be willing to abdicate his own supremacy by injecting a mythical God who is superior to the man. Man would not have denied himself the absolute freedom to do whatever he chooses by creating a moral God who's going to restrict his behavior and is going to hold him accountable for any infractions of his rule and his law. We are forced back to the conclusion that there must be a real personal God, because mankind wouldn't have conjured that up. If you ever read some about the mystery religions, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to you, paganism and what have you, the gods that they dream up are worse than we are. They are capricious. They are cruel. They are vicious. And the God of the Bible is not. The God that's been revealed is not. He's anything but those things. It is curious indeed to consider how man could have formulated the idea of God if man was only the result, merely the result of mindless matter that's just bumping around into one another, and you got man. Man lacks the ability to think or to imagine beyond information provided to him by his five senses. Now, if you don't believe that, you come up with an idea, just one, that you didn't first see, hear, smell, taste, touch. You just come up with one, some concept, anything. Man cannot gain information that's not provided through one of those avenues or a combination of them. Yet, he allegedly conceived of a being who is not dependent on sensory perception. God is above the senses. Yet, to conceive beyond man's empirical, physical perception is beyond his ability. Where then did man conceive of this idea of a God that's beyond perception? You must answer, he conceived of the idea from the God who revealed himself to man at some point in the past. It is a strange thing if all that exists is matter in motion, that matter should have universally worked out the idea of belief in God. I mean, matter, trees, dirt, rocks, oceans. Did they get together somehow and have a conference and come up with the idea of God? The moral nature of man grows directly from the idea of a moral God. The fact man possesses moral concepts of right and wrong, that he has a sense of duty, that he has a sense of oughtness, argues for the existence of God to whom we are morally accountable and from whom our sense of right and wrong is derived. This sense of oughtness is universal across the planet. Men of every generation, men of every civilization, tribe, clan, have some sense of fairness and justice. Now, while we don't all agree about what's right and what's wrong, we all agree that there is a right and a wrong. We all agree that some conduct is to be preferred over other conduct. In other words, all men believe in the existence of a moral law, and each constantly tries to convince himself that he is living consistent with that law, that he's doing the right thing. When one goes against this code, that is doing what he knows to be right, against what he knows he should do, then he has a feeling of guilt. His conscience troubles him because he's violated his moral code. But what's a conscience? Where did it come from? How did we come to have that? It could not be the result of directionless, evolutionary alteration of matter, because matter is non-moral. Rocks, soil, trees, they do not possess concepts of duty, justice, moral obligation. They don't have any of that. And man possesses all of that. How can this be explained apart from God, the moral ruler of the universe, who's laid down these laws? Since man has a moral nature, it's only reasonable to believe that the cause producing man also produced within that man a sense of morality. It is more reasonable to believe that there is an all-powerful, creative God who brought man into being than to believe that non-moral matter acted upon itself and produced a creature with moral sensibility. Yes, I believe in God. I sure do. And I'll tell you something else. You know, we're granting them something that we shouldn't grant the skeptic when we say matter can't do these things, and we point that out to them. But you know what? Where they really are is they've got to come to the conclusion and defend the idea that nothing suddenly got busy and did something, and that something was creating all that we see. Who can believe that? I believe in God. There is no other reasonable explanation for the concept of an eternal God and the man who resulted from his creative work. Let's go to the cosmological argument. Cosmological is a big word. It is also referred to as the causal argument. I think about it in terms of cause and effect. The law of causality stresses that every material effect must have an adequate cause. That bench had to have an adequate cause. And the cause had to be greater than the bench is, because the cause put all of the material together, gathered that material and put that together so that it is symmetrical and it works. And so that's the causal argument. It is the most certain and universal of all scientific laws. There must be a cause for the universe, and it must be an adequate cause. The argument is the cosmos is an effect produced by a primal cause, a first cause, which from the nature of the case must be a person. This is one of the oldest formalized arguments for the Christian position, the believer's position. Paul offered the basics of it in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. Now, he says it in a very compressed form, but he says it very well. In Romans 1:20, for the invisible things of him since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even his everlasting power and divinity. Paul emphasized the fact that the present universe bears witness to the existence of a creator. You can see through the things that are made, the invisible first cause. We can't see God, but we can see a lot about God when we look across that grand starry host out there. That's an indirect argument for the existence of the Lord. And by studying the creation and effect, I conclude that it was caused by a first cause. The argument from cause expresses the need for an adequate cause of all things that exist. There's a fellow long ago named Thomas Aquinas, wrote a series of books called Summa Theologica. He was a priest, a Catholic scholar. But he made this statement: that which does not exist begins to exist only through something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And thus, even now, nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. And he was right. To have something, we must start with something. Aquinas simply said that something cannot come from nothing. The argument from cause deals with cause and effect. Every effect must have an adequate cause. The truth that something cannot come from nothing, that's axiomatic truth. What do you mean by that? It doesn't require proof. It is self-evident truth. A circle, for example, is an axiomatic truth. Circle's round. You don't come to that conclusion by proving it. It is the nature of a circle to be round. Between 2 points, the straight line is the quickest way to get from one to the other. That's an axiomatic truth. It's not the source, not source from proof. It just is. Something must come from something. The perception of our physical senses show that something is. We exist. The universe exists. But where did we come from? Did we come from primordial goo, as the evolutionist argues? That's not reasonable, because something had to cause what now exists, and it had to be greater than what now exists. All that exists did not spontaneously come to be. Nothing didn't get busy suddenly one day, become something, and create what we see. Therefore, we must ask, what caused the things that now exist? From whence do we come? And from two premises: number one, something cannot come from nothing; number two, something exists. We can deduce that something has always been. There must be an ultimate and eternal something. If there was ever a time when there was nothing, there would be nothing. There is something, therefore there must always have been something. If there ever was a time when there was nothing, nothing could have ever come to be. Nothing would be. The way they say that in Latin is ex nihilo nihil fit. From nothing comes nothing. So there must be something that's eternal and uncreated. You get back there. You have to find that. But that which existed from eternity must be sufficient in itself. Why would you say that? Because there was nothing else but God before the beginning. And he has to be sufficient in himself and dependent on nothing other than himself. That something which has always been self-sufficient is God Almighty, El Shaddai. Matter is not sufficient. The materialist argues that the first cause was matter, was primordial slime. Well, the Creator must of necessity be greater than the creation. I'm talking about qualities of being, of personality, not substance. God created soil, but that does not mean that he is composed of soil. God created mind, he created personality, he created volition, he created thought. He must at least possess those qualities himself. The first cause must be infinite, it must be independent and adequate. The first cause must have been adequate, but matter is not adequate as a first cause, because for matter to have produced life and consciousness and mind distinct from matter, it would have been the same thing as getting something from nothing. For these things, what things? Mind, consciousness, they're not found in matter. The world does not explain itself, and matter offers no explanation for the cosmos. The universe needs more explanation than what the materialist can ever provide. Only God is sufficient. The universe is composed of mind and matter. It is impossible to suppose that each exists independently of the other, as it is impossible to suppose that one is the cause, or they're both the cause and the effect, each one of them. Instead, we reasonably assume that either mind or matter is the first cause and the other is the effect of that. One existed previous to the other and is responsible for the existence of the other. Which came first? It is reasonable to believe that mind acted upon matter, that mind was the cause, and that matter is the effect. To reverse that order, twist the harmony of the universe. For example, nests do not create birds to sit in them. A bird has enough mind to create a nest, and he's primary, he's before the nest. The James Webb telescope that we're hearing so much about these days did not create astronomers to gaze into those instruments and obtain information. The car or the truck that you drove down here in this afternoon did not create you to drive it. Mind is superior to matter. Life, including mind, could not have arisen from a dead, inert matter. Matter remains in its original state until it's acted upon by some external force. For example, a block of marble has no capacity, no ability whatsoever to transform itself into a beautiful sculpture. It requires a sculptor. It requires a man with a hammer and a chisel knowledge in order for that to take place. Matter lacks the power to act upon itself in a purposeful way. Matter could not have produced the changes necessary for the present existence of our universe and the life that is in it. Consequently, mind must be eternally existent and must be the origin of all that we experience as life. But mind and intelligence must be assigned to a person. And this intelligent, infinite person who is the Creator is God Almighty. The Bible opens with the declaration, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All life forms had their origin in the mind and the creative force of our Lord Yahweh. Only God could have exhibited such causal ability. Yes, my brethren. Yes, brethren, God is. And the argument for the existence of God finds biblical expression in the words of the Hebrews writer in Hebrews chapter 3 at verse 4, when he observes that every house is built by someone, but he that built all things is God. Now, some people react to that arguing, well, you know, scientists are very near to producing life in the lab from non-living matter. I've heard that all my life. I've heard that they're just about to do that, and they're just about to cure cancer too, and just about to do a lot of things based on what they say. But what if they did? What if the scientists did give rise to a life that was completely out of the norm from inert matter? All in the world that would prove is that it takes intelligence to create life. That's all that would prove. We already knew that. We've been knowing that our whole lives. It then follows, if intelligence is necessary for the creation of life in a lab, then it most certainly is necessary for the creation, the original creation of the whole universe. So the Christian chooses to believe the more rational idea and sees the origin of life in the living God rather than non-living matter. The materialistic atheist has no right to say that that choice is unreasonable, because he's destroyed his own argument when he is forced to admit that life does not arise from non-living matter. The rational cannot come from the irrational. A rational being cannot come from an irrational thing. That too is the equivalent of getting something from nothing. But rational beings exist. Got a house full of them here this afternoon. Therefore, the rational being has always existed. And that rational being is God, brethren. Is it reasonable to think that the universe is eternal and uncaused? There are two more academic concepts that a lot of you know about, and those are the first two laws of thermodynamics. The first one says that although energy can change forms, it cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, the sum total of the energy in the universe remains constant. The second law of thermodynamics states that in any real process or system in which energy is converted from one form to another, at least some of that energy will be converted to heat energy, which cannot be converted back to useful forms. In other words, in any closed system, there must always be a decrease of order or organization. The laws of thermodynamics prove that the universe is growing old, just like some of us. It's wearing out, and it's destined to burn. Dr. Robert Jastrow is considered to be one of the greatest science writers in our time. And he wrote thus, and he's not one of us. And currently there is a great deal of discussion about the fact that the second law of thermodynamics applied to the cosmos indicates that the universe is running down like a clock. If it's running down like a clock, there must have been a time when it was fully wound up. Only as a result of the most recent discoveries can we say with a fair degree of confidence that the world has not existed forever. But it began abruptly. It began without apparent cause, in a blinding event that defies scientific explanation. Well, again, we know that. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Is it reasonable to think that the universe itself came out of nothing? It's hard to find a reputable scientist that will take that position, but there are men that are so determined that they're not going to accept the superior being as a creator of the universe that they're going to argue that something came from nothing. Not only is that self-contradictory, and it's just ridiculous, it violates the first law of thermodynamics, which says neither matter nor energy can be created or destroyed by nature. Clearly, the universe did not create itself. It won't destroy itself. God will bring it to an end when He's ready. The universe was created by a supreme being, a superior being. And since we nullified the idea that the universe is uncreated and eternal, and nullified the notion that the universe created itself, the only alternative is that the universe was created by something or someone that existed before the universe, some eternal first cause, some a person or thing that is superior to the universe and is of a different nature, since the finite contingent universe cannot explain itself. If there's ever been a time when nothing existed, I'll say it again, there'd be nothing now. It is a self-evident truth that nothing produces nothing. I wasn't real good in math, but I can get that one. 0 plus 0 is 0. And it is a self-evident truth, and since something exists, it follows something has always existed. Note the argument. Everything that exists is either mind or matter. Something exists now, so something eternal exists. Therefore, either mind or matter is eternal. We'll come back to the good Dr. Jastrow, world-renowned scientist. He concluded that there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. I agree with you, sir. Thank you. The central message of the cosmological argument is that every material effect has an adequate cause. The universe is here, intelligent life is here, morality is here, love is here. What is the adequate cause? Since the effect can never precede or exceed the cause, it stands to reason the cause of life must be a living intelligence, which itself is both moral and loving. When the Bible records in the beginning God, it makes known to us just such a first cause. One other, the teleological argument. The teleological argument is also known as the argument from design. That's why I like to discuss it. But if you get into the study of apologetics, you're going to run across books that have some of these words in them. I just want you to have some familiarity with some of those key terms. As I say again, don't be intimidated by that. That's just words. Just words. Teleological argument. Argument from design. Why didn't they just say that? I don't know. They do what they do. Teleology is a study of evidence from design in any form that you want to take it to. It is the argument for God's existence based on the evidence of design, purpose, and adaptation in His creation. The order pervading, I should say, the inorganic, the organic, and the human realm is indicative of a purposeful plan and an intelligent and good purposer, if you will. I believe in God because the universe exhibits positive signs of intellectual causation, of design. Our daughter happens to be a physician. When she first started medical school, they have a course that they take early on called gross anatomy. And that's where they dissect a human cadaver to get hands-on familiarity with all the parts and where everything is. But she said you began by turning that body over. This person's dedicated their life to scientific study and to help doctors learn. And cut it open and look at the back. That's where you start. And said, she named how many 100 bones that move in concert. You've got blood vessels, you got arteries, you got veins, you got ligament, you got cartilage, you know, all of these things, just thousands of parts, and they work in concert, and it is a remarkable structure. And she said, you know, if you can't see design in that, I wouldn't know how to talk to you. I just wouldn't know how to talk to you. And so it gets more complex as you go. Well, the plan and purpose found everywhere in space and time where we live occupy, or I say that we occupy, it points to an intelligent creator. It is absurd to think that the orderliness found in our world resulted from just random forces working by chance. Simple illustration of that argument, I think, can be helpful. Suppose I show you photos of the Mars rovers. I think there's 2, maybe 3 up there now. And I show that to you, and then this is the day before they took off. And they're all going on the same day. We know they didn't, but for the illustration. And I launched into a discussion of the complex nature of the machine to the degree that I understand it. Each of them has multiple wheels connected to axles, and on you go. Inside each of those rovers is a vastly complex set of computers and instruments and an energy source. Outside each has sculptured lines. After considering those photos, I turn to you and I assert, you know, all that happened by chance. Had that tornado, you know, that tornado that came through Houston, it went across the Space Center and blew a bunch of junk together and made these rovers. Yeah? And then a volcano went off right under them and blew them all the way to Mars. And then they worked when they got there. And you say, well, that's silly. That sounds silly. Well, it is silly. But it is a minor thing. Mars rovers with no builder is a minor marvel compared to a universe with no creator. The intelligent design and causations evident in the new rover are even more evident in God's creation. It is through, or I should say in the world of philosophy, it was through the work of Plato and Aristotle, so far as we know, they were among the first to suggest a design argument. The cosmological argument demands a cause of the existing order of things. The teleological argument says that the order of things is so ordered on purpose. Both arguments go hand in hand and they support one another. The universe exhibits intelligent design to the glory of God. Look at the starry heavens. Examine our own earth. Consider the great wonders of the human body. These are not accidents, brethren. These are God's mighty works. Psalm 19 and verse 1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Psalm 104 at verse 14 says, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is a sphere poised in free space. It rotates on its polar axis once in 24 hours, giving us the alternation between day and night. It revolves around the sun annually. It is tilted at an angle of 23 degrees and is 93 million miles from the sun and about 240,000 miles from the moon. None of that is accidental. None of those things is by chance. All of these are evidence of design because they balance the world and make human life possible on this planet. If the Earth were not tilted on its axis, water vapor would go to the North and South Pole and stack up as huge mountains of ice. And if the Earth rotated much more slowly than it does now, half of it would roast and the other half would freeze. If the moon was about 1/5 of the present distance from the Earth that it is, tides would sweep over the highest mountains anywhere in the world if that took place. And so it is as the great prophet Isaiah said in Isaiah 45 at verse 18. God did not make the world a waste, but created it to be inhabited by man. According to the scriptures, man should be able to examine the things that are about him and deduce from those that they are the result of an intelligent design. Job 12, verses 7 through 9 says, But now ask the beast, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain it to you. Who among all of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this. You know, study those things. Study the design, the intelligent combination of physical elements, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and so on, in the proper quantities to produce innumerable things makes a strong argument for the existence of a great arranger. It has been calculated that if the 26 letters of our alphabet were tossed into the air by chance, that they would fall in their A to Z order once in every 500 million times. On that basis of that calculation, what would be the chance of tossing those letters so as to produce the Bible? If we omit God from our explanation of the universe, we must assume that the elements of our physical universe were tossed into space, fell together in their present orderly form by utter chance. What reasonable person can believe such an account of the creation and governance of the universe? Consider for just a moment the world of cellular biology. There are about 100 trillion cells in the average human being. Some cells are so small that it'll take over 6,000 of them laid end to end to cover 2.5 centimeters. That's not much. It is estimated that nerve cells can live as long as 100 years. It's estimated that white blood cells are not estimated. We know they live about 13 days. Red blood cells live 120 days. A single red blood cell contains 280 million molecules of hemoglobin. Each molecule has 64,500 times the weight of an atom of hydrogen and is made up of about 10,000 atoms of hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, plus 4 atoms of iron, which is key. Each human cell contains 46 chromosomes, and in each chromosome there is deoxyribonucleic acid, also called DNA. DNA is the age-long blueprint of all heredity. It is in the nucleus of every cell in your body, and it determines every trait like eye color, height, skin tone, hair texture. These traits are locked into the DNA structure of every cell since creation. If you describe that or transcribe that into English, the DNA, one cell's information, in a single cell you would fill up 1,000 volume set of encyclopedias, 600 pages each volume. This incredible order we're asked to believe is mere happenstance. The order and complexity of the world sings of an intelligent designer. The order and the complexity literally sings of an intelligent designer. The world is in just the right place. Her crust is adjusted within 10 feet of what's necessary to sustain life. Earth rotates every 24 hours. Were that delayed, life would become impossible. Our sun is a sun that allows for the kind of life that we have on this planet. Its size, its density, its temperature, its rays are characterized by just the right balance. They have to be right, and they are right. Considering the bulk of the earth, its place in space, and the nicety of the adjustments, the chances of these things occurring randomly is incalculable. These facts cannot be reconciled with any laws of chance. Design presupposes a designer. That logical statement cannot be refuted by materialism or any other philosophy. The complex circuitry of a computer works with each computer component of that machine to do intelligent work. What does that tell you? It tells you that the designer was intelligent. The universe was designed by an intelligence as well. Did order come from disorder? Did intelligence arise from unintelligence? Does mind come from mindless matter? Does feeling come from that which has no feeling? In an examination of the universe, I must ask with Isaiah of the atheist, when he asked in chapter 40 and verse 12, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out the heavens with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in balance? Somebody did. Who did? It was God. Thank you.